Welcome to the reality show, day 101 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Morgan, Marco, and Richard. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hi,
Thank
good,
you.
thanks. Yeah.
Pretty good.
So later on in this show, we are going to talk about that protest in London and specifically the guy who said we need to normalize massacres to the cheers of the audience. But first, our first story is Turkey is the new Iran. So Turkey, there's an incident yesterday in Turkey where was it yesterday or the day before, where an Israeli football player who plays for a Turkish team scored a goal and then did some gesture in support of releasing the hostages. And he was arrested. First of all, he was kicked out of the team. He was fired. He was then arrested, and eventually he was kicked out of the country, luckily, because it could have ended much worse. So yeah, Marco and Richard, you said you asked not to be on shows where we're talking about sports, but we're not going to talk about the merits of the goal he scored or anything like that. I have some thoughts on this, but I will keep them to myself until everybody has their say. Marco, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, just to let people know what the terrible gesture he made. The guy was actually wearing a bandage on his left around his left wrist, and all he had a few words was a 10710, which is 100 days since 710. And his great scene was actually to show it to a camera or whatever, and that was enough for him to be kicked out. I suppose that's normal nowadays in Turkey, given that the whole thing has turned into a suburb of Tehran. It's actually quite appropriate. Turkey is on the skids to become a properly Islamic republic. Erdogan has been in power for 20 years. He's one of the three great tyrants of the times, really. Putin, Xi Jinping, and Erdogan. Of course, he's a bit of a Mickey Mouse tyrant because it's hard to take him seriously. But nonetheless, Turkey is a member of NATO, so the threat is not only the wacko guy, but it's the fact that we have a NATO member who's behaving a bit erratically, and you can guarantee the rest of NATO membership will not be able to contain them.
Yeah, certainly. And I think what this shows is what Turkish society is like generally, and I think we're going to see kind of a contrast as we delve further into this episode, particularly in the contrast with the guy you already trailed in London. And if you already look at the comparison of what Razi's mentioned of what the guy said in London compared with what this footballer said, merely marking that it was 100 days since the event, that is interpreted as celebrating 100 days of war, which is not the same thing by any means. And that extrapolation from that goes to show, that you sack the guy, you kick him out of the country on the basis of that, goes to show exactly where the mindset pre-existing is to anyone taking anything that resembles the Israel side in Turkey. So I think that's clearly what's going on here. The fact is that Turkey sits at that border between East and West. NATO is one element of it, but it's also the increasing move towards Islam from previous secularism, and Erdogan looking to be a strong Muslim leader and seen as such by the entire Muslim world. And he's always playing that card when it comes to the international stage. Not to mention, of course, and I'm sure we'll delve into this further, his links with other similar strong men, not necessarily Muslim ones, across the globe, and their pacts with one another and support for one another when it comes to it.
Morgan.
Yeah, so this guy has had this investigation launched into him on the grounds of inciting hatred. And also common, I think, when people are discussing these kind of things, they kind of end up being very subjective. They'll say, well, from Turkey's perspective, it may be inciting hatred. But concepts have objective meanings. And this guy was not, by any means, you can, I think, reasonably say, inciting hatred. And also, I don't think that anything he can, this is basically just a proxy for Iran's position in relation to the war. sorry, Turkey's position in relation to the war, excuse me. And Turkey is a country which has basically been on a downward spiral for many years now. I have some family members from Turkey, funnily enough, through marriage, and they all really hate it. They're really quite glad to be over here. Um, so Erdogan, just in case people don't know, was viewed when he was the mayor of Istanbul as being kind of this great hope for Turkey, this progressive leader who was going to bring Turkey into the modern age. He had this kind of story of, I can't remember if he's an orphan or raised on the streets or something, but he was just selling pretzels when he was a kid, quite humble beginnings, ending up becoming the mayor of Istanbul, and then eventually coming on to be president. And then we find ourselves in 2017, and he's promoting a referendum to abolish the parliamentary system and form an executive presidency where he has, total power. And that was following a coup attempt in 2016, if everyone remembers, which was fairly scary. And basically, he's gone from this kind of hope for the West for an enlightened, progressive future to another crackpot autocrat. And of course, when the referendum was going on in 2017, the basis upon which it was being done was to modernize Turkey and to make it this is literally what I remember them saying, a modern, progressive country. So at least in his own rhetoric, he's still that kind of guy, although he's doing all these terrible things. And then, of course, you throw in the kind of standard anti-Semitism, which you see in that region of the world, and then you end up with Turkey in this position of doing these terrible things in its relation to the conflict, and then also to this poor football player who's basically on the wrong end of it. So those were my initial thoughts.
Yeah, and also I think part of the context we have to remember that the Hamas, the Palestinians, are still holding hostages that they were captured on October the 7th. So, let's bear in mind, they're reminding people that after 100 days, hostages have not been released yet by Hamas.
Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Bonnie asks, does Turkey welcome Palestinians or home to Hamas? So I remember during the Gilad Shalit exchange where over 1,000 terrorists were released in exchange for the soldier Gilad Shalit, was held by Hamas for 5 years. I remember at least one of them. One of them was this woman Amna Muna, who committed a terrorist attack years earlier. You can read the story somewhere online, and she was released to Turkey. I don't remember if there were others who were released to Turkey, but no. Will they welcome the Palestinians en masse? No, of course not. And we have this mutual Turkish friend who tells me, Erdogan is considered pro-Israel because there are still relations with Israel, and there's cooperation behind the scenes while he publicly calls Israel a Nazi state and celebrates the resistance movement, resistance like we saw on October 7th. And that really makes you wonder, when we talk, by contrast, when we talk about South Africa, we talk about a country where there's horrible pro-terrorism leadership, and we hear a lot of opposition from within. I don't know how much there is to Erdogan. I mean, there is some, but I don't know how much there is on the issue of Israel. It seems like a country where, of course, if you're an Islamist, you will be, against the Jews. If you're communist, you will be against the Islamists, but against the Jews. So yeah, I'm not sure how much there is, which brings me to the first thing that comes to mind for me, long before anything like this happens, because I follow Israeli football and I hear of these players from time to time going to play in Turkish teams or in Russian teams, and I think, why? Like, how short-sighted are you? Okay, the Turkish football league is a better league than the Israeli league. It's a step up. It's probably a step up money-wise. But what are you thinking? Like, you're going to live in this country. You're going to be a part of that culture, and so of course I'm glad he's home. I'm glad he got away with it. But there are other Israelis in Turkey who are playing there. There's one who already got in trouble a little bit following this because of something he said. So yeah, think long term. Money is nice, and more money is nicer than less money. but not nice enough that you should live in horrible Islamist dictator, semi-dictatorships. Marco.
Well, the whole point of the Turkish Republic when Ataturk set it up after the Second War, well, just before probably it started, it was to be in contrast with the Ottoman Empire, which was an Islamic empire. The whole point of the first constitution was to be open to all religions, a bit more like trying to be like Israel is today, where every religion is safe, where people are treated properly, and it kind of worked for a few decades. But Erdogan, I think, he is first of all is the leader of an Islamic party. It's not the hardcore jihadi party, but it's moving that direction. So he's playing every side really right now. A few years ago was trying to show how pro-Israel they are, because they rely on lots of tourism from Israel. So he was trying to sell Turkey as a non-anti-Semitic country. Clearly, that deploy didn't last very long, because we've seen how it behaved immediately after October the 7th. And to be fair, is now is leading a coalition now, government, which is propped by a kind of neo-fascist party, and another one which is a lefty super Islamic. So
yeah, I mean, he was re-elected in only May last year. And of course, Putin was the first to congratulate him. I think even almost before the votes were fully in, Putin was slapping him on the shoulder across the phone anyway, in terms of showing support. I think there's a long time been dodgy relations, strained relations between Turkey and Israel. I mean, Erdogan stormed out of a meeting with Shimon Peres back in 2009 at Davos, and refused to go back to Davos ever again. And then there was the whole incident with the Mavi Mariana ship that was leading a flotilla of aid convoys to break the blockade of Gaza. Yes, aid for whom? For Hamas, no doubt. So Israeli soldiers boarded the Turkish ship, the Mavi Mariana, and I think about 10 or 12 Turkish people were killed in that, and that strained relations particularly. But this is this is really a religious thing now. It's certainly become that way as he's been bolstered by these more minor parties of an Islamist nature. As his presidency has gone on, he's had to take support from those kind of sides, and he's moved towards that position. There was a time when he was looking to get Turkey into the EU, for example. That long since seems to have ceased to be the case, as he seems to have taken the Muslim world as his new home place to grow a bigger community with. I mean, the EU themselves and a lot of the West have been often using Erdogan as a useful person, in the way that the West nearly always bolsters these dictators abroad. The EU has paid Turkey 6 billion euros in like the 4 years since 2016 to Turkey to help them house migrants from Syria and prevent them from coming into the EU. So, but by giving Turkey 6 billion euros, you're only supporting Erdogan, and he's often playing this game where he's in the middle. He's using a pragmatism of his own, where the West uses their pragmatism to play people off against each other, to show support one way or the other for the benefit of taking all the time in a country that is now suffering from rampant inflation, and which is one of the key reasons that it's doing so badly at the moment. And of course, all of this rhetoric is a cover for that.
Yeah, you mentioned the 2009 flotilla, so that we need to just to be clear, for people who've been 15 years, maybe people don't remember or don't know about it. So yeah, the idea that it was aid was, of course, bullshit from the start. It was known to be, at the very least, an anti-Israel propaganda, event, and Israel said, "Don't do it. there is no shortage of aid to Gaza. It's the place that receives the most per capita aid of anywhere. They don't need it. They just need to take it from Hamas and use it for whatever its supposed purposes. So they were told to turn away, and the other ships did, and the Mavi Marmara didn't turn around. And then Israel said, they kept warning them, you're not going to be allowed. You will turn around, or we will help you out with that. And then the soldiers boarded, thinking, yeah, these are peaceful protesters. So the soldiers boarded unarmed to begin with, and were attacked because if you support terrorists, you're probably kind of at the very least a wannabe terrorist, and will use an opportunity to take part in that. So yeah, this was an attack on Israel. Like there was no other way to look at it. It's not a proper military attack. It's some Western kids who were educated in whatever UNRWA light kind of schools they have in the West. But it was still an attack, and Israel defended itself. And then Turkey made Israel look like a bad guy. Of course, we saw the kind of protests we see now. They were shorter lived, but we saw them in the West at the time. And yeah, what ended up normalizing relations again between Israel and Turkey was Netanyahu in his signature cowardice, basically apologizing and I think giving money as well to the families of the attackers who didn't quite get to see their values realized on that day. So yeah, that was an embarrassment. I don't think Israel should have normalized relations with Turkey. I think Turkey is far gone enough that we need to start questioning. Yeah, what are they doing in NATO? Why are we okay with them? In their current may have made sense when NATO was formed, but it doesn't make sense now, and certainly doesn't make sense for Israel to let this horrible regime treat Israelis the way they do and act diplomatically in the way they do. Morgan.
So when this guy was fired by his football team, part of the reason why they said that they fired him is because he went against the values which our country holds. And so Erdogan has criticized Netanyahu's government for its actions in Gaza for being no less than what Hitler has done. And so it's lovely to hear that countries like Turkey hold the values of being anti-genocide. And they're, of course, providing documents to the South African delegation at the International Court of Justice at the moment. It's really nice to hear that. It's also really nice to hear from Russia that they also are pro-peace and against genocide. That's also really nice to hear. It's also really nice to hear that from Turkey. Except, of course, from China as well as Turkey. Except, of course, none of these countries are in favor of peace. Russia's engaged in waging a war in Ukraine at the moment. Turkey, by throwing this allegation of being like Hitler at Netanyahu, is doing something really, really low and disgusting. The reason why he's picking that example is because of the history of the Holocaust, and just to make it sting a little bit more. If his country were very serious about genocide, they would have apologized for the Armenian genocide, which of course they haven't done. They've acknowledged it. They haven't apologized for it. So why are they getting all uppity about this? It's not because they actually really care about genocide. Why are they supporting the case in the International Court of Justice? It's not because they actually think that Israel is perpetuating genocide. It's a tool to beat their opponent. And that should the fact that people aren't more outraged and disgusted by that indicates something really, really terrible about the way people think. They can't realize that this is just a cynical use of a concept which should be inviolate, if that's the right word. There should be the deployment of it should be really precious, and yet it's being used by people who just want to criticize Israel on any grounds. It's being used cynically and opportunistically to spit in their face. I think that's really terrible. But we find out that Turkey holds the values of being anti-genocide. Hooray! Good for them.
Thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says, I was yesterday at an event for the hostages, but nearly only Jews there. Shocking, I think. Jews are once again left alone. I don't know. There was also a protest in London. There were tens of thousands of people. I don't know what the division is, but I know of many from a not Jewish background, including 75% of this panel, were pro-Israel. That's pretty anecdotal, but still, it's, yeah. But there is a wider problem. Even many Jews are on the wrong side of this. Kathleen says, yeah, good that Morgan got a mic. See, yeah, your super chat and membership funds go to a good cause, a mic and a camera, by the way. And Moda says, all 10 who were killed on the Marmara were members of the IHH designated terrorist organization. They made videos beforehand saying they are going to Gaza to become martyrs. Yeah, it's been long enough that I forgot about the IHH. I don't remember about that video. Are you sure about it being designated terrorist organization? And if so, where? Because I just quickly looked them up on Wikipedia, and one of the first things you see is where is it? The IHH holds special consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council since 2004, which is already guilt by association, even without what they've done in the past. But if you know where they are designated a terrorist organization, let us know in the chat. Marco.
Yeah, this accusation of making the comparison Nazi and Israel is really the lowest of the low. That in my mind, it's become a bit tiring, to be honest. It's yesterday. I think Michael said something like the Nazi were an existential threat to the West, and Hamas is not. Well, the problem with Hamas is the concretization of the real existential threat for the West, which is Islam. There's no two ways to say this. I mean, the philosophy behind Islam, the embedded hatred for the Jews, hatred for life, hatred for the West, is just part of what it is. And that's the philosophy that inspires the whole Middle East and the whole protesters in the West. It would be nice not to have to finger a whole group, because of course not everybody who believes in whatever ghost is a bad person. Most people are actually confused and don't really know what to do, or other people, as you were saying earlier on, are just so brainwashed that they don't know up from down. But as Morgan was saying earlier on, the action you take are informed by your philosophy, but your philosophy can be changed. You're not born religious, you're not born Jewish or Muslim. You choose to be a religious person. You can change your religion. It's not like the color of your skin. So I just hope that people will start looking around and realizing where the real evil is and where the real problem comes. And if you are a religious person, you're implying effectively that your humans are slaves to a god or every other human who claims to speak on behalf of this god. So if you believe that the human beings have got the right to their own life, their own freedom, and their own pursuit of their own happiness, well then start looking at where the rights come from and why the rights are there. They're not given to you by some god or some state or anyone. They're yours because you're a human being. And if you use your brain, you can understand this and tries to stop relying on some diktat from the sky, because that's all bullshit.
I think a lot of these criticisms of Israel by Turkey are dressed up in all different ways, but they come to exactly what Marco's just outlined there. I mean, sometimes it's referred to as anti-imperialism or anti-Americanism as being the reasons for criticizing Israel. They're surface covers really for it. I think you've only got to look at how Cyprus, for example, is treated by Turkey. I mean, Erdogan's been calling for a two-state solution in Cyprus since the Turkish invasion there 50 years ago. You can look at how Erdogan supports Putin by not condemning the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, there's not the consistency there, other than the pragmatism, what's useful to a dictator of a certain kind, and the anti-Semitism that underpins attitudes towards Israel.
Morgan.
I don't have too much else to say about Turkey, I guess. I mean, I think it should just be plain to everyone that this is a disreputable country in the plain light of day. And I guess something that came up around the Brexit referendum really was there was a lot of concern about Turkey joining the EU. And as much as some of that was misplaced and was mingled in with kind of unsavory sentiment, shall we say, it's a legitimate worry in the sense that Turkey is a country that doesn't really hold a future that's desirable to anyone who wants to live in a free, who wants to live in a free world, a rights respecting world. And Turkey joining the EU I wouldn't think would actually end up curing it of its problems. I think probably it would just have a more malign influence in the EU or on any of these organizations as part of NATO, whatever. And what our leaders are going to do about Turkey, I don't know. Probably nothing, basically, because they aren't exactly, and they should basically be able to crystallize the problems with Turkey around its reaction to Israel. Except they aren't going to because they can't even conceptualize the problem properly themselves, and they can't even stand up for Israel in the way that they should do themselves. So I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but I really don't. I think Turkey is basically going to continue in its decline until Erdogan is thrown out, and there's probably a very serious revolution in Turkey. But I don't see any signs of that, or consider that to be very likely any time in the future.
Yeah, especially given that even the opposition leaders, the Republican People's Party leader said something like the world should mobilize for Gaza, and the other guy effectively called for Israel it wasn't very nice to it. So there's really no hope for the country. As Morgan said, unless you have a proper change of the guard, and hopefully it's going to be a change of the guard for the best, not for the worse, because we're seeing bad things getting even worse. So hopefully.
And even on the level of free speech and attitudes towards journalists, that's been, the absolute example of dictatorship playing out before your eyes. So I mean, it's a path that they're definitely on.
Yeah, it would be nice to end the Turkey part of this show with something positive. So let's do that. It has nothing to do with Turkey, but Undeath Metal says in the chat, Morgan looks even more like a charmingly young Charles Darwin than before, to be honest. So
I think Darwin had curly hair, but he did live not very far away from me when he was in Edinburgh. So there you go. I don't know. That's something about Charles
does
Darwin.
that give you the right of return to his home?
Well, it's now the National Museum of Scotland, so I'd have to invade. Anyway, sorry, never mind.
I think it's called occupation.
Yeah.
Are you claiming not to have curly hair?
Am I claiming not to have curly hair? I wasn't born with curly hair. It developed when I was sort of 8 or 9 years old, so it's been foisted on me by God for my sins, I think. But there you go.
Speaking of somebody who wants to foist stuff from God on us for our sins, Jesus, that was a good transition. Anyway, these protests are happening in London every Saturday. The pro-Hamas protests. We've spoken about them a lot on this show. We hear chants like "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which is a call to exterminate the Jews in Israel. We hear calls like "Globalize the Intifada," which is a call to exterminate the Jews everywhere. And we hear that in the chants from people. By the way, there were a few interesting new things on this previous one, this last one 2 days ago. One of which was support for Yemen attacking ships. Did you guys see that? I don't think we have that video queued, but I came across it, and of course this on stage.
I dare you to look into the eyes of a Gazan child and tell him that you tried your best. Our day will come, but we must not be complacent. Our day will come, but we must normalize massacres as the status quo. Thank you.
So let's afford him a courtesy he probably wouldn't afford us, and point out that he said he later I don't remember if he tried to walk it back. After a little bit, he said, no, I meant not normalize massacres. And then I said I misspoke and so on. But of course, you know, whether or not he misspoke, he said what he said, and then the audience cheered. This is in central London. This is thousands of savages cheering for normalizing massacres by, you know, in the name of Allah, and massacres, obviously, of Jews. So this is where we are. I'll go to Marco and Richard first because you're just a little bit closer to London than Morgan is. Not by a lot. You're both, you know, far away. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can see from the background, that looks like Westminster Abbey in the background, which means that he's in Parliament Square, which is directly in front of the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben and the like. So this is right in plumb centre of London. This is part of the annual, well, the weekly protests that London's experiencing from the pro-Palestine, anti-Israel set. And I understand this guy is a poet, and he's certainly using poetic license in claiming that he didn't mean what he meant, because I'm sure you can't misspeak to that level. It's just hard to grasp.
I may be less charitable in this. I think it's just an idiot who in front of a microphone, he thinks he's God and start spewing out words without actually thinking. I mean, what does it actually mean? What does it mean, normalize massacre of what? Who normalize massacre for whom? I mean, oh, God almighty. And the cretins in the crowd, they would probably cheer if you just went there and farted. I mean, can you rely on these people? A bunch of cretins, really. How can you describe them?
Yeah.
Morgan.
I mean, this guy is a writer for The Nation, which is a major publication. It's not quite as big as some of the other US-based publications like, I don't know, Vogue or something. But Vogue's not a serious publication. The New York Times or something. It's not as big as that. But The Nation is sort of one of the major publications on the left. I mean, it used to have Christopher Hitchens as one of its major writers, so it's not exactly a crackpot small outfit in this. Well, it might be a bit crackpot, but it's not fringe. And this is the guy who gets employed by them. And you stole my comment, Richard. I was also going to comment on where he is. It's unbelievable that he's then standing where he is at the heart of British government, really. The Palace of Westminster will only be across the road. And saying this stuff. Now, yeah, looking at his Twitter, he said that he obviously meant to say not to normalize massacres. It isn't that obvious, I have to say. The stuff that you're getting out of the kind of side which he is supporting and which he is representing, it is not obvious at all that that's not what he meant. Hamas, after all, said that what was it? We want October 7th again and again and again. It was something to that effect. And the people who are going on these marches, their moral priorities are completely diluted. I mean, I mentioned before that there was a girl who was on this march, a video I saw of her being interviewed, and she was talking about the strike on the Houthis in Yemen. And she was saying that clearly, you know, the fact that our government is willing to take life in defense of shipping containers shows their priorities. And the way people think about this is just unreal. In order for these shipping containers to have been, you know, attacked by the Houthis, what it means is all the people on board were threatened at gunpoint. And if they resisted, they would have been killed. And this is also property being stolen from people. It's a major disruption to international trade, which would do a lot of harm to people economically. We've lived the harm that came from the rising prices from the invasion in Ukraine should teach people that. So these people, I don't really know how to talk to these people. They are just so far gone. I don't know how you would ever have a conversation with them where you could speak kind of on a basis where your priorities are sorted out in the right order. So this guy says that he meant to say we should not normalize massacres. Do we take him at his word on that? I don't know. It seems, and actually whether he meant it or not, I suppose is besides the point. The fact that the crowd cheered is unbelievable. I think that's really the point, but I'll leave it there for now.
So a few years ago, I spoke on a panel on free speech, and I remember thinking, okay, I did a pretty good job. And then I watched it later, and I realized there was one line that I actually said something that I misspoke and it came out the opposite of what I meant. So that can happen. It does happen. Sometimes you misspeak, but yeah, to that point, Morgan, uh, did the people hear the word that he didn't add there? Did the people hear the word not? Because he didn't say it. And you know, so what he did say was the opposite of what we're supposed to believe he meant. And yeah, people were cheering. And so that is a terrifying thing. That and the fact that they were also cheering for terrorists who are attacking ships that no doubt are, you know, have some products that would be used by the people who are cheering, who are supporting the terrorists. Um, and yeah, you know, if you look at the reaction since, first of all, you met police saying we're looking into it. You know, it's very much like the UN saying we're looking into it. I don't believe that we're looking into it. You were there. There was police presence. He was on stage. Like, what are you looking into? Do you need to replay the video to see if maybe there was an audible not in there? Um, and of course, he and his, you know, his supporters, you know, the scumbag Islamist Dili Hussein, who also for some reason is in this country operating freely. They're making fun of the fact that people are now take issue with this, and they're making fun of it because certainly in the case of Dili Hussein, he is a massive supporter of massacres of Jews. We've seen his reaction to October 7th. We've seen it unfortunately on some mainstream broadcasters shows who think they are somehow representing some sort of you know, intellectual I don't know, some sort of free speech movement by allowing terrorists and terrorist supporters on their channel. So yeah, I would very much like to see something being done about these people, the leaders of the movement, and what can be done about the thousands of cheering savages. That is a question that needs to be asked, and I don't have an answer for it, Marco.
Well, as excuse for the police, if they went on the stage and picked the guy down, it would have been we would be in the middle of a riot right now. We're finding ourselves. It's a gunpowder keg, really. All you need a little spark, and these guys will go absolutely bombing, and we're gonna finally pay for our continuous equation of equating cultures and this kind of appeasement we've been running for the last 50 years since the war. Really, we've been accepting cultures which we would never normally accept because of the past, because you know we like multiculturalism and all the stuff that comes with it. Of course, multiculturalism means that a bad culture is as good as a good culture, but we now find ourselves with a massive split between the Western values and non-Western values, mainly Islamic again. And at some point, there's got to be a clash, because those people will never accept. You know, let's be peaceful and accept Western values and have a debate and change. They will not change. They tend to be fairly raucous and violent when it gets to it. And we've seen already in a few episodes happening where they are literally fighting with other groups just because they're different religious groups from them. So the police have to be really careful about this. Of course, they're gonna deal with it, but probably behind the scenes. Again, the reaction of the crowd, I don't believe that they're all beyond redemption. Most of them are just lefties, people who are victims of the current education system. They don't really understand anything beyond, this is our guy, so we're supposed to cheer him.
I think the key thing that I draw out of this is the emotionalism that is the way that people are responding to everything. And the crowd is ready to cheer at any pause in speech from that stage, regardless of what's said ahead of it. And the whole way that this is carried out in the mainstream media, as much as on the pro-Palestinian side, is with pictures, with images, with disconnected footage, with no conceptualization of how things fit together and what caused what is the effect of what. So it's that disconnected emotionalism that is really so ugly to see when it involves cheering hate so blatantly from the same people who are at the least excuse will call out hate on the other side when it isn't even there. So that's one of the things that I think is key from this. I think this did remind me of one of the events that happened almost within days of October the 7th, just because out of coincidence, there was a couple of days after October the 7th, the Frankfurt Book Fair was going on, the major book fair every year where authors and agents, etc., meet. It's been going for 75 years, about the same length of time as UNRWA, not that they're connected. And there, a Palestinian writer was about to be awarded a prize for their book, which depicted the rape and murder by Israeli soldiers of a Palestinian girl, and she was being awarded a prize for it. And they chose to postpone that prize because it was literally within days of October 7th. And obviously things were at their height then. But that's merely a question of timing, because if it had been any length longer than a few days, I'm sure that would have gone ahead straight away. And in no time at all, there were about 1,500 writers and Nobel Prize winners, etc., coming to the defense of the fact that this should have been awarded. And I think that does, I'm not saying it shouldn't necessarily, that does create some interesting debate about how you judge something that has the surrounding situation has changed for, the dynamic has changed for, but the fact that such a book was even promoted to such an extent probably exposes the anti-Semitism or the anti-Israel nature of so much of the media anyway. The fact that it was even up for such an award, I'm sure they tend to have an emphasis where they're looking for things which promote their own agenda, their own sense of the narrative.
Morgan.
So this guy, whether he meant it or not, part of the reason I guess why we should still be suspicious of him is, Richard was saying this guy's a poet. When I was looking into him a bit before the show, he published a poem a couple of years ago, which was talking about Israelis harvesting organs from defeated Palestinians and feeding them to their warriors. Right now, he tried to wave this away by referring to a controversy that was in 2009, a controversy I don't know about, but it sounds an awful lot like the kind of blood libels that you get coming out about Jews drinking blood, baking blood into bread, doesn't it? And I guess the point, whether he really meant that or not, although I have to say, after a while, once you start building up a huge rack of these things which you didn't mean to say, there's only so many times you can play the bloody fool card, isn't it? Until you start to wonder, does this person really actually mean it? The point about more than whether he meant it or not is that why is it so often around the anti-Israel movement, the pro-Palestine movement, whatever you want to call it, you get all these whiffs of anti-Semitism, which they never mean, of course, they never mean. But so why do you get them? And so I think it's because either there are anti-Semites there, which is probably partly going to be the case, and partly because then the way people on the left think about these things is they have this tremendous blind spot towards it. And this is, I've mentioned before, David Baddiel's book, Jews Don't Count, is pretty good on that. And one of the major examples he points to was the Whoopi Goldberg controversy that was it 1 or 2 years ago, where she said that the Holocaust wasn't about race. It was about white people on white people. And I think that goes to the heart of a lot of the blind spot that people on the left have. A lot of the way they think about race, a lot of the way they think about post-colonialism, which I think factors into this a lot, means that anti-Semitism is a kind of lesser prejudice. And so therefore they don't notice it, or they think it's kind of something that people on the right care about. And so because they're tribal, they don't want to pay attention to it. And so you get this sort of awful mix of people together who presumably all at the march. And so presumably the people who cheered partly may have been anti-Semites, and I suspect that's partly true, but also just wouldn't really notice the anti-Semitism when it's plainly there in front of them. And I think something that we need to just do, we need to say a lot, or we just need to keep pointing it out. We need to keep saying, look, there's an awful lot of anti-Semitism going on here, or a lot of things which are going right to the line of anti-Semitism and then walking away. And because anti-Semitism is what fuels a lot of the conflict. And so we need to keep pointing this out, because the fact that the left has this blind spot, it can't be ignored. It has to be pointed out.
Yeah, you're right. If you look at the tweets of this guy is clearly beyond redemption. He's clearly an anti-Semite. He's clearly on the side of Hamas. I'm not even doubting this one. And as you say, the issues with the crowds, the cheering crowd that would cheer anyone on the stage, because the stage represent the people they are supposed to cheer, even if they don't even understand what they're talking about. And as you said, if you look at the crowds, you see lots of young kids, lots of well-dressed, white, middle-class people, typical Islington set, typical Londoners, middle-class, lefty or whatever, people who take Corbyn line, really. People who like to equate anti-Semitism to anti-capitalism. It's no surprise that every single lefty party across the world is anti-Semitic. It comes out on the side of Palestinians and Hamas. We said more than once, and you said it again, this blind spot that the left seems to have, especially in Britain. It's exactly the opposite of what they claim to be standing for. And they don't realize that actually by behaving the way they're behaving, they're not being good Marxists, they're being bad anti-Semites.
Yeah, the issue of, is anti-Semitism, Morgan, you said maybe is looked at as a lesser prejudice. I mean, it could also be looked at as a non-prejudice at all, as a, correct reaction to what the Jews are, which is, I think, the way such people justify it to themselves. And again, the Nazis had like made arguments for it. It wasn't like we want to kill the Jews because we're evil. It's no, here's why the Jews deserve it, and this is very much the same. Now, with the call for the massacre or call to normalize massacres, we saw how many of these people were celebrating on October 7th on Twitter or wherever, and then kind of walked it back when, Norman Finkelstein said, I thought it was only 50 people killed. The woman from Novara Media was celebrating it, and I guess somebody higher up said, these are not the things we put online. It's what we say when nobody's listening. I can only imagine. I can't imagine anybody in Novara Media not being happy on October 7th, but only one of them tweeted it. So yeah, this is, and that's not a Muslim organization. So this is very much a widespread problem here that we really, really need to think about. Nicole said that in the pro-Israel protest yesterday, there were many Iranians. Yeah, I would believe that, because people coming to this country from Iran, you would think for the most part are people who are leaving, what Iran has become for a culture similar to what they would like probably Iran and other places to be like, whereas from other places in the Middle East, people are kind of exporters, cultural exporters. They're bringing their ideas and their way of life here, and of course they're welcomed with open arms by people who shouldn't welcome them with open arms. So I saw something on Twitter of some girls standing next to the protest, the pro-Israel protest that was going on, and holding their phones and the PLO flag on it. And, nothing happened because the protesters on the pro-Israel side are peaceful. Imagine, you don't have to imagine actually, what happens when somebody is suspected of being pro-Israel. I mean, okay, you have the Neturei Karta, the token Jews that the anti-Israel movement likes to always put at the front of these protests. But we've seen, Gays for Palestine people being abused by some of this crowd who who don't want them there. So you can only imagine if somebody stood by with with their phone open on a flag of Israel, what their fate would be. unlike this speech, I'm pretty sure the police would do something about it. But yeah, Marco, as you mentioned, if the police tried to do something about it, they would be lynched because
The
that's who
police
these
have been
people.
doing something about it. They've been handing out leaflets to people to warn them that some people have been crossing the line. Not explaining how, really, not explaining why, not explaining what the consequences would be in any detail, but handing out leaflets and maybe badges, who knows, is about as far as they're prepared to go at the moment. It's softly to the point of lunacy.
I mean, maybe that's a positive. You know, Israel dropped leaflets on North Gaza, and if the future protests pro Hamas look like North Gaza, then that's not that bad. But don't ruin the buildings because it's London. Buildings are nice. Thank you, Frank, for the super chat. Frank says, in Turkey, there's actually a town called Batman. I think there's also a president who thinks he's Batman, so maybe he named it after himself. Thank you, Kathleen, for the super chat. Thank you, Apollo Zeus, for the super chat. I saw somewhere something I wanted to comment on, but I can't find. Oh yeah, Bonnie says, I saw that we're looking into it headline and thought it was about the UNRWA Hamas connection. Yeah, that was what it's about, but it apparently applies to all sorts of people who don't want to do anything about what they should be stopping. All right, we have a few minutes left. Any final thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, Nicole mentioned Iran pre-Islamic Revolution. Well, there were women ministers, and
In the government, you mean?
In the government, yeah, they could wear whatever they want. They were fairly civilized before 1979, when suddenly the clock was turned back to the Middle Ages, and now we're seeing the women are wearing the Muslim garb are actually killed, or if they're lucky, put to prison, and that's what happens when you turn the tide back, when you go back to being a bunch of savages, and you turn your back to civilization and Western values.
And this is the point about immigration when it comes to the UK, is if you're taking, for example, into the country people from Iran, from the early 80s and so on, from that revolution, it's because they're trying to preserve some of the values which align with the values of the country they're moving to. And it's the integration part of it that's the crucial element. If you're trying to preserve the violence that you left behind and bring it with you here to your new country, then that is something that is just not acceptable. And that's the situation that we've tolerated too much for too long. I think when it comes to this protest in Parliament, I think in particular who is protesting and his background and the kind of people who do what he does, this is where, like, the intelligentsia and academia and leftists meet the ignorant, emotionalist, tribalist crowd, and you see the two come together. And that's the sum total of where the culture is heading at the moment, where academia leads the way and the ignorant sheep all bay and cheer the wrong thing as a result. And that's what, with no critical thinking whatsoever. And that's the challenge that the whole world faces, is in getting back to conceptual, reasoned thinking.
I don't really have very much else to add, except, well, I'll just echo Richard's point, I guess. A lot of the people who seem to be on these marches don't seem to have been first generation immigrants. You've seen some kind of talk about immigration in relation to this. Either they're second generation, who always seem to be more radical than the first. Presumably their parents moved here because they valued something about our society. And then the second generation is even truer to the values that our society teaches them. They go to university and then they pick up all this rubbish, right? And then, so the real radicals here who are criticizing Israel are homegrown, and a lot of them they're British kids who go to university. My flatmate is a philosophy student at Edinburgh University now, and the stuff that gets, it's not even the stuff that kind of gets that they're indoctrinated with, or that kind of happens occasionally. It's more just like the baseline, in a sense, where the political center is so far shunted to one side and is so anti-Israel that you just kind of pick it up. It's in the air that you breathe. So if we want to change the future, I guess, for how people in the West think about Israel, we need to have a lot of more criticism of higher education and the kind of rubbish that it puts out.
All right. Tomorrow on the reality show, South Africa versus South Africans, we will be joined by Chris Hadding, the executive director at the Center for Risk Analysis in South Africa. The daily objective, we don't have a title for it yet, but it will be about the recent revelation on what the actual plan for October 7th was and why it didn't work out. Morgan, where can you tell people about your Substack?
The Substack, which is currently changing names. It has the generic name of Morgan's newsletter at the moment, but it's got, I think I'm going to name it after one of Emil Ludwig's books. You can look up and his bibliography for that. I can try and guess which one. But you can go find, it'll be linked in the description. There's a new article coming out tomorrow. Someone told me that they're having trouble seeing the last couple of articles I published, so I'm trying to sort that out. But there's also some news on there. I do some news commentary, so go find it there, and then you'll find my Twitter as well, where I'll start tweeting again soon, I promise. So that's where you can find me.
Marco, Richard?
No, not doing social media. I refuse.
No, but you do have something to promote.
We certainly do, yeah. The other channel of the Ayn Rand Centre UK is the Briefly Objective, short form material, edited material from this channel, but without having to look at any of our lovely faces, because you've got proper images and footage to reinforce the message behind them. So you'll find videos on there explaining the problem with UNRWA, for example, the problem with the United Nations, the problem with the conceptualization of things like genocide and apartheid and how they're misused. And of course, some of our favourite villains in this whole piece, people like Finkelstein and Owen Jones and Kay Burley and the like, all get their appearances across a whole range of videos there. So if you want to see in a nutshell what the arguments are, that's the place to go, and that's the place to forward them from to your friends who are in any doubt as to what the right side is in this.
And a good time to start would be about a minute from now when the next video premieres on that channel. It is The Lie of Anti-Zionism. If you're watching this live, there's a link in the live chat. If you're watching the recording, there's a link in the description. You can go over there, like it, share it, subscribe to that channel, subscribe to this channel. And and I'm at Razi Ginsburg on X. We will see you all tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thanks, guys, for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Cheers.